Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Hey everybody, welcome to Paranormal Karen. Quick promo, just check out my Patreon. It's Patreon.com/Rontowski. I think I'm going to have some more club dates for you. But right now, fabulous topic I have never done, which gets me super excited. My guest is named Von Braschler. He has written, I got that right, Von?
Oh, yes, Karen, you have that just right.
Oh, perfect. Okay. And he has written many books, but the one I am most excited about is called Time Slips. Now, okay, I don't even know where to start with this. First of all, you had told me off air that you write about other topics, but this one keeps coming back. How does that happen, or what draws you back to it?
Well, it was the first thing I ever wrote about 20 years ago. It was the first kind of awakening I ever had as a lad of 11 or 12. It was, I guess you'd say, a paranormal experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had others that were like time slips similar to that throughout the years, and it just keeps happening to me. And like a lot of people, I just ignored it, wouldn't speak about it. Then I noticed other people experience a similar encounter. They slip in time just for a moment, and then they come back, usually very disoriented. So I began to think that just of the people I knew, I could interview people and my own experiences, and then looking at some of the most celebrated and well-documented and researched cases of time slips. I could write about this and maybe, just maybe, show a pattern, because we cannot really prove what's happening here. It's so non-material, but we can establish a kind of a pattern to all these different anecdotes that people have.
Okay, and
I think in that way.
Because I don't think I've had a time slip that didn't involve tequila.
Yeah.
What does that feel like? What happens? How do you know?
Well, I'm going to blow your mind, Paranormal Karen, because I'm going to suggest you have. You have. So, okay, now I'm not saying that everyone has had them, but the majority of people have had lucid dreams.
Mm-hmm.
They've had dreams that are very distinct, and they go to a place in their dream that is not anything within their memory, within their physical brain memory. They have no frame of reference from their past life experience in material form. Mm-hmm. They will encounter people or events or situations that they have never experienced before, so it's not within their memories. They're not just rehashing as we would in a typical dream. So I would suggest that many people in their dreams, their most vivid lucid dreams, are actually slipping in time. Then furthermore, I would suggest that people will often have like a daydream, mm-hmm. or they'll have kind of a moment during the day when they're kind of disoriented. And they tend to say, oh, it was just my imagination, or it was a kind of a delusion, or it was a daydream, and they shake it off. I was talking to one radio station down south, and I said, it's the vapors. And she said, oh, I know what the vapors are. So, there are things that happen to us. And well, how about this? People often will talk about having a deja vu experience. Mm-hmm. They'll see someone that they've never, ever seen before in this lifetime. And they go to great lengths to say, now, I must have met you once, like at summer camp when we were kids, or on vacation, or I passed you in the street or in the supermarket, or did you ever live in Des Moines, Iowa, say, have you ever been vacationing, on the Riviera? No, none of these. Were you ever on television? No. Were you ever on, and you run out of reasons why you should remember this person. They were never in a magazine.
Mm-hmm.
You never met them on a vacation. So you say, well, you are so familiar. So are you. So I'm suggesting that we do encounter things that are not of this
dimension, consciousness.
Here and now, let's say, here and now.
Right. I always think that in a dream, some of those places that are not of our consciousness, that's what I always figure that's a place. But also, and I don't know if this relates, even one of the chapters in your book is about time in other dimensions, because I know the big one is having 100 dreams where 1,000 things happen, and then I look at the clock and I've been asleep for 5 minutes.
And that's because you experience timelessness. You're outside normal space-time, where time doesn't flow in the certain pattern sequence that we're used to. Click, 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 like the clock.
Right, because it's more. It's like when people have a near-death experience and they see their life pass before them all at once, but they say it's not in sequence; it's all at once. But I understood it, right?
Yeah. It just goes. It flashes. Just fast forward. It's like flip cards. So one of the interesting things in an earlier book I wrote on time, it was a physicist in Russia, and he was walking on the beach with his son, and he looked up and he said that the only time we know is based on the sun. It's like when it rises, when it falls. Mm-hmm. That's kind of Einstein's theory of relativity. It's light. However, he said that we have this illusion in our life that things happen in a certain linear sequence. So he gives the example of like a tumbler. We watch a tumbler in a gymnastics exhibition, and the tumbler will start at one end of the floor and do various acrobatics, and then we say, well, we saw them all in sequence, but they were all like instants. There was this instant, then this instant, and this instant. Think of flashcards. You make flashcards like for a movie, and then you flip all the cards real fast, and then they seem to like create movement. See, and like it's like if you look at an old movie reel, 35 millimeter movie reel, every single frame is a still, and then there's the next, then there's the next, then there's the next. Mm-hmm. Well, in our mind, we play them all forward. I don't know if that's really a good explanation of time, but we try to make things very linear and very material, and it's comforting to us that there's a starting point and an ending point. But what if there isn't? What if time is looped and never ends?
I love that. I love the idea of the loop. Now, also, I think that, and I want to go back to, before I even get to my next question, so time slips during the day. So I say I'm doing something and I am a little foggy, and then I come back, and it doesn't even have to be the clock, right? It might just be like, wow, how did I get over here? This happens a lot, I think, when people are driving, and they did they did a thing on PBS about how you think that your brain, you think like, I'll do that a lot. I'll be driving, and then I'll be like, have I even been watching the road? What has been going on? And they talk about how your brain does know. It does know what it's doing, but why is drive? Here's my interesting theory. Okay, I'm going to get this all in one word. I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over. I
got you.
I once tried to write a comedy, about Stephen Hawking's talked about the connection between time and gravity, that and the black hole. So I always thought,
absolutely.
So I thought when you're dreaming or when you're in the other dimension, there is no gravity, so there is no time. Was that I'm on the right path?
Well, yeah. Well, and to put it in words that people might find comfortable, you're not grounded. You're simply not grounded. You're floating. You see, you're floating. Your spirit or your inner self is floating. So the core of your being is not grounded at that time. It's a really good analogy, and I totally buy it. Now, I think a lot of people too, and I've had this experience. They'll have kind of like a time shift or time slip, where they can't account for certain times of the day. You mentioned driving in a car. Well, I've had the experience where I walked across town when I lived in Oregon, and suddenly I was at the end of town. I couldn't remember much. And then if I tried really hard, I did remember it, but it didn't look like this town. It looked like something else. So I think that there are gaps in our day where we're just somewhere else, and I would suggest that we're time shifting.
I have to say, I think it's because of I think it's because of a I don't know that there is a good childhood. I'll just leave that like that, because I don't ever like to complain or talk about my family that way. But there are enormous gaps when I think about my childhood.
Yeah.
Like years that I don't know. And it might be a little of both, but there is also sort of this, like, I sort of just remember being an adult and all that before it. Like I know people that are like, I remember being in the womb, and I'm like, are you kidding? I can't, like, my life started, I think 14, 15, if you ask me, in my brain. So could you have time slips that big?
It could be slipping in and out all the time, so that you have no sense of continuity. And I think this whole idea of continuity is kind of a crock anyway. I mean, there really is no continuity. It's like we're all the time taking a step to the right and then 2 steps to the left. I mean, that's the way we work, I mean, I live with cats, so I understand how it works. There's no pattern to any of it.
That's so funny. One of the best pictures I ever took was of 3 black cats sitting all together on a chair. And I just took the picture, and I hadn't had a lot of cats, and everyone was like, how did you get them all to pose like that?
That's amazing.
It was, I guess they were beautiful. So I guess this would be the big question. When we slip in time, do we go somewhere else, or is it like a wrinkle or like a fold in a shirt where you just went from one to the other, but you don't see the wrinkle?
Well, Mr. Einstein said that you cannot separate time from space, so he's called it space-time. However, I think that a lot of times that you'll be experiencing that same setting where you were at an earlier or a later time. It's like that's the constant. So I'm beginning to think, and I used to be a ghost hunter, and I used to do ghostings, and I wrote a couple of books about ghosts. And I'm beginning to think more and more every day that a lot of the spirits we encounter as ghostly are really people that are just slipping out of time.
And
so their time.
They could be people that are alive now. We're just seeing them slip in and out.
Yeah. So if there is only one timeline, and we're all like, it's one big conveyor belt that goes around and around, and it comes back, loops on itself, then the fact that we're here now is that we focus our perception on this point on the timeline. There are different other points on the timeline that are just as legitimately here and now. So, or as the physicists like to say, many nows, many instants. So there is no now, there's many nows. So what I'm suggesting is that sometimes when you see someone that looks like they've come from another century and they're kind of ghostly, what you're seeing is someone who's kind of like converging their spot on the timeline with your spot on the timeline. You've kind of bled into each other.
That's in, so.
I think of it.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I think I've actually seen that, and I used to say, well, I'm seeing ghosts. Well, that's one way of saying it, but then you have to say, what is the ghost? Is it a deceased person? Mm-hmm. And then you have to say, well, what is deceased? I no longer believe in life and death. There is no death, and most of us are not fully awake, alive. So this whole idea of who's awake and who's not awake and who's alive and who's dead is kind of silly. But I do think that a lot of times people will see what they think are ghosts. They're actually, for a moment, seeing a scene from the past in that very, very spot where they stand. So yeah.
I was going to say, there's I love every sentence you say. I write down 4 more questions, which is great. It's a fascinating topic. Most of my childhood that I can't remember, I could have been other places scaring the hell out of people. I love that analogy.
You could have. You could have.
Well,
I'm often accused of people of just popping in and popping out, and it's like, I guess I've just become so accustomed to just time shifting. And I've not really developed a lot of control to it. I just kind of like float around,
So people might be like, "Hey, I saw you on the street the other day," and you were like, That wasn't me. I wasn't there. I just popped in time."
Yeah. They'll say, "Well, what did I do?" And I'd say, "Well, you were talking about." I said, "That seems very, very likely true." But very often, when you do have these experiences, you don't converse, you don't interact, because you're not both physically there.
That makes sense.
That's why the ghostly apparition is etheric, because you don't have a material form. Now I have actually researched and found amazing stories of people that have physically shifted in time, and they've done it accidentally. They slipped in time, and they've actually had encounters, and they've actually had interaction with people in another time, and then they've gone back to their original time and place, and they've had clear memories of it, and they've been able to document what they saw.
Wow. Okay, we're gonna the next half we're gonna get to that, but I'm gonna let's take this break, and then I want to hit ghosts just for another second, and then I want to hear about those stories because. It's just all fascinating. All right, hang on, folks. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody. Just want to let you know my tarot class is on sale this weekend only until the 23rd or the 23rd. I believe it runs out at midnight. So that'll be 2 days. You can get half off when you go to karenrontowski.com and click on tarot. And then you're going to use the coupon code October, all capital letters October. Also, November 1st, I finally have a Patreon. I know I'm so far behind everyone else. It is a tarot and psychic development. So it's going to be some paranormal, but mostly tarot and psychic development. I'm going to be putting up classes myself that are tarot classes, and we're going to be doing meditations and psychic exercises, and there's going to be homework and all kinds of fun stuff. I'm also going to have guests come on and tell us about their process, how they do their thing. So November 1st, the first class will be out. November 4th, patreon.com/Rontowski. All right, Vaughn. So, there's 2 interesting things about ghosts, which is our spirits, which is, I think, like sometimes we talk about a spirit that is, first of all, let's break it down. You have your intellectual hauntings, which seems like someone you're speaking with, or you can have a conversation with, or they're conscious. And then you have your, how come I can't remember the word? And I talk about this all the time. Residual haunting, where it's an energy imprint, not a consciousness. And so sometimes people will worry about a tortured soul, where, we hear this woman crying all the time. And people will say, that's so sad, eternity like that. But maybe it's not eternity. Maybe it's literally to her, it's a second. It's a half a second.
It's just a second. Yeah, you're just witnessing just a moment in time. And the proof of that, or the possible argument for that case, is that we see a ritual pattern of behavior or repeated scenes again and again and again from these so-called hauntings or spirits.
Yes. That's where I feel like it's a video imprint, especially if they're not aware, they're just running by every time we run by. I think it's actually very interesting and funny. I think it was my friend Elaine Hathaway who told me a story about how, in this house, there was this, in the cellar, there was this horrible residual haunting of this person just crying, and it was a woman. She was crying over and over to the point where I think that I can't remember if Elaine said she could see her face, like the spirit was that strong. And then one day she was walking into a building, And there is that woman, and she did live in that house. She just had so much like sadness and crying in that cellar that actually, even as a living person, she left a residual imprint.
Yes.
That's pretty fascinating when you see your ghost as a live person. That's got to be, that's a little shaky.
Well, it makes you wonder. Now, the woman that taught me how to de-ghost houses, she said, beware of this very thing, because people would create these kind of shadowy creatures that would resemble themselves. They'd be very, very sad or very, very angry. And she said, we've created them. We've actually built them. And we continue to feed them with our negative emotions.
Yeah, sometimes the tulpa or or the thought form.
Yep.
And that's very interesting because they did just, in the last probably 15, 20 years, a poltergeist kind of changed its definition to something that is coming off of someone in the house. It's not an outside entity. It's a like a ricochet energy off of them. So, yeah. Okay. So tell us some of these time slip stories.
Well, let's see. Some of the famous ones that really amaze people. Everyone loves the story of Charlie Chaplin, right? So he was in an L.A. Opening night debut of his new movie. I think it was called The Circus. And anyway, it was a big deal in those days to go to a Charlie Chaplin opening night,
Yeah.
And so people are all lined up, in anticipation. They're milling out in front of the theater. They're looking at the posters and anxious to get inside. And they're all dressed up, back in the day. And there's this woman. She's oddly dressed, and she keeps walking back and forth on the walk in front of the theater. And people keep noticing her as she walks back and forth, back and forth. She's oddly dressed, and she's holding something up to her head that looks like, it's almost like a mechanical device of some sort, and she's talking into it. But there's nobody noticeably talking to her. Mm-hmm. She's talking into it. She's exasperated, trying to talk into this device. And of course, back in the day, I think it was like the 20s. I mean, people didn't know what a phone was, let alone a mobile phone. So now there's a lot of conjecture, and there's actually pictures that were taken of this woman. You could study these pictures if you go online, look, and it looks like maybe she's holding a cell phone to her ear, and she's trying to talk to somebody, but it's like she's out of her time in a place when there are no other towers, no other transmitters, no other cell phones. So she's not getting through, but she's exasperated trying to talk into this thing. That's a famous case because there were a lot of pictures and a lot of eyewitnesses and a lot of collaboration of what was seen and what was observed. Now, who knows? There was a case of 3 naval cadets in England in 1957. This is one of my faves. These are Royal Naval Cadets in England. Now they're young teenage boys, and they're orienteering. Their exercise is to try to read a field map to see if they can find the Suffolk village of Kersey. And they did. They walked into this village, but it wasn't exactly what they thought. It looked like a strangely medieval village, deserted, dead, sickly. Everything was quiet when they entered this little village, and it was still. When they first came in, there was a wisp of smoke that came from some chimney, and then it disappeared. And then they sounded a church bell, something that sounded like a church bell. It rang briefly and stopped. They saw birds. They saw birds in a pond, but they weren't moving. There was no sound. There was no movement. So then they looked at the buildings, and the windows were all whitewashed, and there was some green smearing on the windows too. And they looked inside these ancient wooden buildings, very crude buildings. There were no furnishings, no people. They were freaks, so they all left. And when they left, they heard the bell again. Now they got back and they said, "What did you find Kersey?" And he said, "Well, we found this town. It was where Kersey was supposed to be on the map. Oh, what did you see?" And they described it, and they said, "That's crazy." So the more they talked about it, and they would never change their story throughout time. They found that there was a church that was half constructed but stopped during the Black Plague, and that town was almost wiped out by the Black Plague, and they had smeared their windows when they would leave, you know, and there was they described a butcher shop, and they couldn't find any reference, and they kept looking in old records of the town from the 14th century, and from the 14th century there was a butcher shop, and they found out that this town dated back to 900.
Wow.
And it was wiped out. It was virtually wiped out in the late 14th century by the bubonic plague. And the butcher shop that the three boys all described dated back to 1350, but it ceased to exist in any form in the year 1790.
Wow.
Now they would not change their story. And so in 1997, one of the gentlemen in England who was part of the Society for Psychical Research, Andrew Mackenzie, wrote a book called Adventures in Time. It's a classic. It's still around. And this is kind of similar to a couple ladies from Oxford University. Now, one of these ladies, named Charlotte Moberly, she was actually the dean of a women's college at Oxford University. And she was visiting the Palace of Versailles and the gardens there in 1901 with her colleague, another college educator named Charlotte Moberly. And Eleanor Jordan was her friend. And they found that they were almost alone at the Palace of Versailles when they tried to walk through the gardens. And they found, in fact, that the Grand Trianon Garden at the palace was closed on that day. So the two ladies entered what's called the Petit Trianon, the little garden at the Palace of Versailles. Now, they walked across a little bridge, quaint little wooden bridge, and they saw people there dressed in elaborate costumes. And they saw one woman sitting, sketching a picture of the garden. And they said it all seemed strangely out of time. So they walked around, and nobody talked to them. Nobody seemed to notice them, but they observed all this, and there was no sound. Oddly, they returned several times to see the Petit Trianon Garden, and it was never like that again. Never.
Wow.
So they published their strange encounter in 1911, and their book was called An Adventure. And the ladies stuck to their story, and there was also a British investigation of this from the British Society for Psychical Research, and they interviewed the women, and they tried to substantiate their reports. They found that, in fact, there was many garden parties organized in that little garden during the time of Marie Antoinette, who used to sit at a sketch pad painting while the others partied, and that these garden parties were organized by a French poet named Robert Montague. And the little bridge that they described walking across threw people for a long time. But the British Society for Psychical Research determined that, in fact, there was once such a little bridge many years ago. Mm. So here we have collaboration. We have credible sources.
Yes, it's funny too. Every time you think you say strangely out of time, all I can think is Reno. I think Reno has slipped into 1980 and has not come out.
Yes, it is time warp.
It is. So it's interesting. those photos, it actually is, I don't know, I'm sure you've seen, there are some very old, I like that you brought up the photo or the Charlie Chaplin thing. There are actual photos that I feel like they're the old ones. There's like 10 old photos that they cannot debunk. And one of them is of a little girl in a field, and there's a spaceman behind her. Do you know the one I'm talking about? It's pretty famous.
I have heard of it. I have not seen the photo.
It's really there shouldn't have been spacemen or astronauts is what it looks like at that time that the picture was taken. And I wonder if that is, I guess we call time slips. Do you believe that there are time travelers right now?
Yeah, so you're kind of going to where I'm kind of ending up here, and that is that a lot of this explains what we call, extraterrestrials or aliens, or it could be just a future us, or it could be just the future, and now you think of the shamans, and not just in North America but around the world, shamans would go into a deep trance. They would put themselves into a time shift, and they would experience something out of time and space, and they would very often go back in time and listen to the ancestors, and that would supposedly guide their people. And they would also sometimes go forward in time just to observe what awaits their people. So I think that it's very, very likely that we're seeing people from Atlantis or the Aztecs, that visit us. I think it's very possible we're seeing people from the future visit us. I mean, if time is really fluid, and it is possible to time shift like that, not just accidentally like a time slip, but really consciously, like, say, the shamans have done, actually put yourself into a time shift and go somewhere, then yes, we could be observing people from our future or our past.
Do you think you could visit yourself in the past, or there's only one you?
Yes. No, I do. And in the book, I actually include exercises to go back and study yourself at an earlier time. I mean, psychologists for years have been saying, stretch out on the couch and put yourself into a
inner child
kind of
work,
deep,
right?
Inner child, and you visit yourself. Go back as far as you can. Well, what if you go previous to this life? What if you go before you were born? Where were you before you were born? Did you live a previous life? Do you remember it? Can you find it? So I mean, I took some liberty with some of the Eastern spiritual science exercises from, like, the Yoga Sutras. Mm-hmm. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, it has kind of a formula for going into a deep meditation and actually visualizing where you want to go and then putting yourself there, with focused intent. And I think that it's important to know who you are and who you've been, and because that will determine where you're going and what you should be focused on.
It's funny. There was a movie called Time Cop with Jean-Claude Van Damme, and he always said, "You can't have the same space in the same. You can't touch yourself. You can't have the same matter in the same space."
I think that's true. I think you can't touch yourself, but I think you could be like, let's say, a fly on the wall. I would say it's like more of an etheric body, because you're going to go there in an energy body or a consciousness body. You're not going to necessarily go there in a physical body. But like a fly on the wall is not such a bad thing. A fly has 100 eyes, and a fly is very unobserved.
Yes, unless you're trying to sleep and it's around your ear. That's right. Yeah. Unless you're in a cabin. I always wonder if sometimes that is a little bit of like, even people that don't believe in psychic ability or anything like that will walk up to someone and be like, I knew that's my husband or that's my wife.
Yeah.
Like, I think men do that a lot, that are just totally don't believe, but they walk up and they go, I'm going to marry that woman. I'm going to have 3 kids with that woman. They do it a lot.
Yeah, it happened to me just in the supermarket today.
Are you going to? That's great. So now also, well, you know what? Hold on. I'm going to come back because I think I have a question about group time slips. All right. Hold on 1 second. Hey, I'm here with my friend Ari that hosts, or I want to say takes care of all my Zoom events, my comedy shows, my classes. Ari, tell everybody what type of Zoom events you are great at hosting.
Yeah, so I really take care of any kind of Zoom event, from a virtual camp to lecture series, cooking classes, celebrations like weddings or bar and bat mitzvahs, really anything.
And to me, it just looks like you make my life easier. I just have to click on and talk, which is beautiful. Tell everybody, what are you doing behind the scenes that helps me so much?
Yeah, so I'm taking care of all of the settings, like muting and spotlighting people, making breakout rooms, recording the meeting, really just all of the tech pieces you might think of or not think of. I'm taking care of that.
That is so helpful. And it really is the difference between something looking amateurish and something looking really professional and wanting people to come back to your meeting again. So tell everybody where they can find you.
Yes, so you're welcome to email me at wharton.ari@gmail.com. That's WHARTON.ARI@gmail.com. And you're welcome to email me with any questions and find out how we can work together.
And your rates are so reasonable, it's crazy. So everybody, wharton.ari@gmail. I'm going to try and have it in the show notes. If you can't find her or you don't know how to rewind the podcast, just email. I'll get you connected. Thanks, Ari.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay, so now you had the story of like the 3 ladies that walked in and saw the garden and stuff. So I always wondered, I had a huge time slip that was, I say I went through a wormhole, but I had one, and I've told this story a couple times, how I started with my friend. We stopped in Carlsbad, got gas. I had the gas receipt. We were driving, and I was driving to Arizona, and I had lived in San Diego, and I knew you go right down the 405, it turns into the 5, you take a left on the 8, you go to Yuma. And I had been living in LA and San Diego probably 20 years by this point. And we were driving, and she was a medium, and she always said when her and I were together that it was almost like a weird energy, like anything could happen. And the CD started to slip, and we both looked at the radio, and then we looked up, and there was a wall that I did not recognize. And I was like, we didn't go past Garnett Ave. We didn't go past SeaWorld Drive. We didn't cross the 8. I didn't see Rosecrans. What is this? And she looks up and starts screaming, oh my God, we're in Mexico. And I got off at the next stop, and we were in Mexico. She calls her husband from there. So we literally have the receipt that has a timestamp on it and the time she called her husband. And there was no way we could have made it to Mexico in that amount of time. And then we had a friend that worked Border Patrol, and he said, no, you would have had Mexican cops, or you know what I mean? He said you would have been chased down. You don't just fly into Mexico without passing something. And it was wow. Yes. And it was it took us 5 hours to get to Mexico. I had to call my gig. I walked into the gig at 8:00. That's how long it took us to get there. And I had to tell him, I was like, I totaled my car. I wasn't going to tell him like, we went through a time loop and ended up in Tijuana. That's never a good excuse. But it was one of the strangest experiences. And I'll never forget her saying, I think it's you and me. I think when we're together, and a lot of other mediums and psychics kind of feel like that. Like when they get around me, something weird happens, which is great. I think that's a good quality in a person. But it was so, I may be having small time slips, but that was a story.
That was huge.
It was huge, and I have no problem telling people anything. This story still gives me the willies.
Yeah. So in the introduction to the book Time Shifts, I have a story that was shared with me by the writer Frank Joseph, and it's of a couple that are driving along the highway. I forget which state, and they pull off because they're just exploring and they pull off and they drive through this funny little town where there's this clock and it has an inappropriate time and it doesn't seem to move and there's a woman pushing a baby buggy but she's not advancing, she's like frozen, and it looks like it's a whole different time, an earlier time, a different decade. And so they said, well, that was weird. So they come to the end of the town, they get on the freeway, they go to the next exit and they say, let's see what this town's like. It was the same darn thing. And except the clock had moved like a couple minutes, It was weird. So, actually, I was on Australian radio, and a woman said, this happened to me. I was driving along, and they have these long drives in Australia. And she said, we pulled off, my friend and we pulled off, and it was a town we didn't recognize. It didn't seem right, So we went up, got back on the highway, and we pulled off the next time, and it was the same thing. And a lot of people seem to have these weird experiences, and they cannot make sense of it. So a lot of times people won't even talk about it because they think, oh, you'll think I'm daffy. So I'll just say it never happened. It never happened.
When I used to, mostly I fly now, I'm probably going to go back to driving, but when I used to really drive to gigs and drive through Montana and through South Dakota. And I don't want to ever be one of those people that is like a flyover. My work is in the Midwest. I don't believe in flyover states. Like those are the real folks. Yeah. But some of these small towns, I almost wondered, like, am I like exactly what you just, like people just standing there or people staring at you that don't seem like people. And, there's other times where I feel like I'm invisible, like, and I don't mean, but I mean, or my energy is so low, and this could be anywhere. This could be in an airport or a store where I feel like people are bumping into me and not turning around to say, excuse me, or they're walking right at me and looking through me. Like, I wonder if that's a time slip right there.
Yeah. I mean, I drove through Montana once in a blizzard in like the early morning hours on an empty tank of gas, and I said, "This isn't going to work." And this is before they had 24-hour automated gas pumps. If they were closed, you couldn't get gas. So early morning, I get to very poor planning, right? So I get to the one end of the state. And I'm thinking, like, I'm never going to make it across Montana. This is just early morning. And it's like I have no gas. And I said, I need to be on the other side of the state, and I need it now. And not only that, I need it to be later when everything's open. And the next thing I knew, I was at the other end of Montana. I still had no gas, but it was later in the day and things were open. And it's like I could never make sense of that. Never.
Wow. Montana, that's almost like the missing 411. Are you familiar with the 411?
I know. Yeah.
Those
weird things in big sky country.
Yes. That is, and it all seems to happen around parks. But you know what else is interesting is I wonder if there is something about moving and velocity, because I know I'm having time slips in my car. I really think that's a big deal. In fact, I didn't even think about it until we're talking about this today, and I'm kind of a little bit like, wow, what's happening? But that makes so much sense. Now, do you believe that since we're thinking of time as a loop, we talk a lot, especially awakening people, we talk about jumping timelines. Does that work? Do you think that way too, or is it more of a loop and a pinpoint?
Well, it's a loop, but you're jumping to another point on the timeline. I think of the timeline like this: as a conveyor belt, and it goes all. Let's say you're inside a warehouse, and the conveyor belt it goes in various configurations throughout the whole building, but it ends up exactly where you are. So, like, if you get on like a subway and it goes around and around, but it has a circular pattern, it eventually comes back exactly where you are. So, I think it's just the point in time that we now occupy as our here and now is the point we're focusing our perception on. But think of this: if you abandon your physical perception, your 5 physical perceptive skills, and you awaken to a higher consciousness or an inner consciousness, and then you're using a new heightened awareness, a conscious awareness, then you're seeing things differently. And then you can actually focus your intent on another point on the timeline, and you say, I want to be up there, somewhere else. So I think there's one timeline, and we simply occupy one point on the timeline. It's like a groove in a record. That's where we are.
Wow. There's a thing. I just did this the other day, and it's called the 2-cup theory. And you take 1 cup of water and you hold it and you figure where you are now. You feel where you are now, and you kind of, I guess you could say, label it. And then you dump that water into the 2nd cup and you hold the 2nd cup and you feel the feelings of where you want to be and how you want to be and what timeline you want to jump to. And then you drink that water down as fast as you can. I think it works.
Yeah. I mean, that goes all the way back to Mesmer, the guy that filled up a bathtub and then he heated up with his hands, and he said that the water then was magnetized, or we called it mesmerized, and it was energized. And okay, so Andre Parts did this with Uri Geller. Uri Geller would put his hands around or in a glass of water, and the water tasted different.
He
so
should wash
we
his
all
hands.
have. Yes, he should. But then we have more modern, the Japanese research of Emoto and hidden messages in water. Now, the different people as a group could focus their intention and actually change the crystalline structure of water.
Yes,
and they could, powerful stuff.
It is, and I do love that. I really love that that 2-cup theory, and I think part of it is not to focus on it and not to keep doing it, like to just let it happen, which obviously would be, changing the point of the timeline that you're looking at. Have you? I think the Matrix movies really do cover it pretty well, don't you?
Yeah. Just go back, Karen, to your analogy with the cup of water. I would suggest to people that's real magic, and I would also suggest that it's transformational magic, because what you're doing is actually using energy to alter something. That's all magic is.
Interesting. Alchemy, kind of, right?
Alchemy, yeah. I'm sorry, I just had to go double back on that.
Oh,
but the Matrix, we're not fully awake. We're not fully awake. We're not fully alive.
That
we're
guy
not.
driving that car, if you just heard that loud noise, that guy driving that car, he's awake.
He's in a different dimension.
Too
Isn't he?
bad I couldn't
Well,
send him into another time slip. Like he's so loud driving.
exactly, exactly. So we're not fully aware of where we're at and what we're doing and why we're here. I mean, this is the dilemma we're at. We're kind of like sleepwalking through life, and not seeing things right in front of us,
I
the
totally
Matrix.
agree. You know what else? I have this theory that this is my theory of life. There are certain like bullet points that we're supposed to hit or we're supposed to finish. And what we do between those bullet points is sort of up to us. It's the old law of attraction. If I'm supposed to have the number one podcast, do I struggle the whole way or do I laugh and have fun with my guests? Either way, I'm going to end up at the same point. But I think that is the part where some things are just, some people can jump money. Some people can jump love. It's just all different. And that's sort of what we're trying to be.
Yeah, and part of it is visualizing, creatively visualizing what you want, and then focusing your attention on what you want. I mean, that's basically my exercises are using creative visualization and focused intent to actually picture where you want to go and then putting yourself there. Because you can put yourself anywhere you want. Now, you can't always physically put yourself somewhere else. I mean, those are time slips, like the ladies walking through the garden or the kids going through ancient, medieval Kersey. I mean, those, but you can actually, you can go to Mexico. Yeah. For a day. Right.
Yeah, it's unexpected. That really did scare me because I know this is a crazy thing, but it's like you could have a time slip and I would be like, well, am I going to get back? Like what if those close off behind you? And maybe that is why people disappear.
Well, I think sometimes people don't come back. I think you always can come back. I think that sometimes you're content where you are. When I was 12 years old, I had to get home because my appendix were bursting, and I decided that I would just get home by walking on the railroad tracks. And I reasoned that the railroad tracks go everywhere you need to go. Well, that's an 11, 12-year-old mind. It's just like stupid. The railroad tracks didn't go to my house. But I stepped on the railroad track. I took one step, and I took another step, and everything was black. And then I'm standing in front of my house, and I step off what I think are railroad tracks. I go into the house, collapse, and I tell my mother, I'm really sick, call the hospital. Wow. And in fact, my appendix had burst. But I was instantly home, and it must have been 20 miles, and I didn't know how to get there. And I certainly didn't walk on railroad tracks because they don't stop in front of my house. Wow. But I never went back in time. I stayed there. So I'm probably 5 hours and 20 miles away from where I'm supposed to be right now. But that's fine. That's fine.
Wow. Okay, so in the last 5 minutes, give us a review of your books. What do you have out there? If people want more on this topic, they should get Time Slips, which everybody you can find, Vaughn, on Amazon. I'm going to have the link in the show notes, but for those YouTubers that sometimes the link doesn't come through, it's VON, and the last name is spelled BRASCHLEK, or LER. I'm sorry.
LER, yeah. So, and if you go to my bio there, under my books, I do list programs like this that I'm on where I discuss the books. So I just did this, and I had an earlier book, 7 Secrets of Time Travel, and then I had a book on moving in the light, which was about time, and then I had a book. The first one I did was called Perfect Timing, and now. The book I just released is called Manifesting, and that's using thought forms to create a new reality. And then I'll have one coming out in a month. It'll be called Mysterious Messages from Beyond, which is hearing thought forms.
Wow. Okay.
So, and I'm working on one on chakra energy impact on all levels. Mental, physical, psychological, spiritual. So I do kind of bounce around on topics, but everything I do is based on consciousness and thought forms. Everything.
Well, we have to have you there. I just hit follow on my Amazon. Vaughn, we have to have you back. This was fascinating.
Well, thank you.
I'm so glad we found each other. I sound like I'm ending a romantic comedy, and now we're breaking up.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Please come back. I'd love to have you on, especially whenever your next book comes out. Reach out. This was a fascinating conversation.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, Karen.
You got it. All right, everybody. I will see you next week, and thank you for listening. Join my Patreon.